The path of preservation consists of a class of characters that are known for their team-wide damage mitigating nature. Nowadays, those same characters have come with added utility to give them additional selling power over the path of the abundance. We're going to take a look into the short history of the most undersold path in the game. The interesting thing to take into consideration is that the path of the preservation still has the lowest amount of characters of any path, excluding the Trailblazer preservation. This was also apparent at launch, with the path only having 2 characters, only doubling that number in present-day Starro for a total of 4. The reasoning has always been quite simple. The overlap between the preservation and abundance path has driven players to only choose what they would need, and never roll again for either path. It's also why Starro has detoured from the fundamental damage mitigating design to a more so damage utility focused character design. Considering how simple the game was at launch, there wasn't a need for characters that did it all in this path, because it would hurt the transition of the character design of the preservation path later on. Despite Jeopard early on having a way to increase his overall base damage through traces, his seamless way of designing the preservation character was a little too soon, and will be scrapped altogether. Today's video is sponsored by Loot Bar. Loot Bar is a safe and cheaper option when it comes to buying your in-game currency. It takes the cheapest conversion currency rate and uses that for your top-up purchases. It's basically a middleman without potentially getting yourself in trouble with VPN usage. As a Starro creator, it gets really expensive to roll for every character, and I pretty much have to do so for these videos you're currently enjoying. The process is very simple. You click on March 7th, decide how much premium currency you're looking for, and then you add in your Starro UID after purchasing, and you will receive the said premium currency in a matter of moments. It's a very smooth and quick process. The other cool feature of this is if you're a player that has never topped it before and has the additional currency bonuses, you will receive those too upon your purchase. Even more jades for the upcoming characters. I'm definitely going to need them. As a new recipient of Loot Bar, you get an extra coupon that allows you to save even more money on Stellar Jades. Check out the link in the description to save on Stellar Jades with Loot Bar, and thanks again to Loot Bar for sponsoring this video as always. That would leave the main selling point of Jeopard in March 7 to be the shielders of characters like Yanqing and Arlen, who mesh well with the kit of these characters. The shield would allow Yanqing to keep his passive stacks that would greatly increase his overall damage. The shield for Arlen would mean keeping this character on the field, as he drained his HP and depended on the utilization of a separate HP bar, which is known as a shield. The shield increased the overall effective HP of the character it was placed on, but considering your character would take no damage to their base HP, you could keep the passive of Yanqing and still be able to counterattack with a character like Clara, which again, the shield was just an increase of your effective HP. Very quickly, would Jeopard develop into being a top tier defensive option with March, being a nice free to play one with her easy accessibility. Considering you needed 2 defensive options for the hardest content the game could offer, having just a Jeopard and Abundance character was suffice. Despite the path doing 2 similar things, there wasn't much of an overlap, and that was because the damage dealing characters in later on content will be designed around the existence of preservation characters. Nowadays, you don't have any more Yanqings and Orlins, hence the overall need for shield characters going down as well, which is why a character like Aventurine would shine with how tailored niche his kit was to the follow-up archetype. Back to where we were, the early preservation characters would continue to dominate the meta, and this would translate very well until the release of the Luocha in 1.1. The thing is that the preservation characters always lacked one thing, a cleanse. While the shield would keep you from dying, it didn't stop you from being crowd controlled altogether. This in turn would give more appeal to the Abundance character Luocha, who had the cleanse and did all the defensive option non-negotiables without burning a single skill point. You also have to remember that this would translate well with the content, because sustained healing over the course of the fights was nice with the enemies not dishing out much life-threatening damage during their turn. The content in question would come later on alongside the release of Starro's first new in-game content and limited preservation character, whose run released at the best time possible. The game had a new content that required having a character to mitigate the damage your allies would take, as the enemies in this content dished out heavy amounts of damage. As you tackled the Swarm disaster, characters like Fujuan and Jeopard would become meta-defining picks for this new content. March 7 would find her designated niche too, with the added utility she had via freeze. Whose Run especially would gain popularity outside of this content thanks to the fact that she made the overall content in the game a lot easier for the player with lower gear quality. Considering she was also releasing after Luocha, so would she come with added utilities such as a team-wide critical rate boost and CC blockage, which paired nicely with characters that depended on not being crowd controlled to maximize their damage. This was enough to bring Fujuan and other preservation characters back on the map, but we wouldn't receive another preservation character until the release of Aventurine in 2.1, and the reasoning was always in front of us. Leading up to the release of Aventurine, there wouldn't be much content added to warrant that of a defensive option release, and pumping out damage dealers were a lot easier because there wasn't as much overlap as there was with the defensive option category. At this point, players also already had the 2 defensive options they wanted, especially with the later release of Huo Huo. There would be no need for another preservation character this soon, and Hoyo would decide to wait until there was a set of characters or team that benefited the most from such a character, much like Arlen and Yanqing did back in the day. With the follow-up attack archetype on the rise, we would receive the second preservation limited character that would finally have its own niche and actual use case over any other defensive option at the time. Aventurine was the final puzzle piece to the follow-up archetype. Now, while he is best in slot in a designated team, he can be used with any of the past characters that not only needed a shield, but also the future characters that could benefit from his debuff application. Now, I'm not going to bore you with what Aventurine does. I'm sure at this point you all get the memo. But what was important to note was the added overall damage this character would bring to the follow-up attack team. The preservation path went from having useless damage dealing traces to actually being able to contribute to the toughness break and overall team damage. Aventurine would bring the preservation back onto the map once more, and convince players that the existence of these characters are still very much so necessary. Now, while the path of the preservation was still able to hold its own at this point in time, the Abundance would need to one-up the preservation in their own way, which would lead to the release of Lingsha, an Abundance character that feels like a second main damage dealer alongside super break characters. Lingsha has the most overall damage from any defensive option character, released to this day, and is not even close. Lingsha also still keeps the fundamental design of Abundance characters with her mass cleansing and healing, much like the preservation and Abundance characters released in the past. She is incredibly niche and doesn't really do her job as well unless there is a present fire weakness on the enemy, thanks to Firefly that's always a reality. But because so, she's extremely niche. With no real need of these specific characters as current content doesn't necessarily call for them, you have a Zhongli situation, where players rather use another buffer for extra team damage instead, which is why zero cycling is as much as a thing as it is today. These characters are no longer necessary with the current iteration of Star Rail, and if they are released, just know they'll be incredibly tailored to a team, much like Aventurine is today. The average player has also gotten better at the game too, so that's one thing to take into consideration. Thank you for watching, and have a nice rest of your day.